Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Emmanuel Levinas Center at the Lithuanian University of Health Sciences for the lecture series about Emmanuel Levinas, literature and medicine. My name is Vidas Surbonas. I'm the professor in the Department of Bioethics, and we are happy or not so happy to tell that this is the last meeting in this series that was led by Professor Sandor Goodhart. And for those who haven't participated in this series, I would like maybe to introduce Professor. And so Sandor Goodhart is a recognized expert in Levinasian philosophy. He is Professor Emeritus of English and Jewish Studies at Purdue University, former director of the Religious Studies Program, Jewish Studies Program, Philosophy and Literature Program, Classical Studies Program. Also, Professor Sandor is the author or editor of 7 books on literature, philosophy, Jewish studies, and even about 100 of essays. Also, Professor is the founding board member of the North American Levinas Society. And we are happy to see Professor at the Emmanuel Levinas Center. Professor has been collaborating with us for a couple of years by giving several talks at local and international conferences organized here and there. We are very excited to see here again at the center again, and also a little bit sad because again soon Professor will leave to the USA. Before starting, we would like to thank the Baltic American Freedom Foundation for funding the professor's visit to LSMO and for such a great opportunity to hear authentic talks, readings of literature, and finding some associations with ethics and putting all of this into medical context. And the session is recorded and it will be available on YouTube in some future. Also, as I mentioned, today is the final meeting, and it will not be traditional as it was previously. Today, we will have a meeting that looks like more a workshop to generate ideas about how we could translate the method of literary reading and understanding of ethical, as understood by Levinas, into medical contexts. Maybe before we give word to Professor, maybe we can introduce ourselves in short in order to get better understanding, of who we'll be discussing today. So my name is Vidas, I already introduced. So
Alexei, a lecturer on Cátedra of Bioethics.
That's enough.
Hello, my name is Eimantas. I'm from Department of Bioethics.
All of us from the same department.
Yes, my name is Yurat, and I consider myself here as a clinician.
And hello, my name is Rada. I'm also from the Department of Bioethics.
Okay. So, Professor Flores.
Okay. So, as you have heard, this is the final lecture of a final workshop, final session meeting of a course that we've been running, in which we've tried to take the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas on the notion of philosophy, on the notion of responsibility in particular, with regard to literature, which is the field in which I work. I was trained as a literary reader, and then I came to philosophy after that, and found that in some ways Levinas was doing in his philosophy what it seemed to me great literature was doing in its writing already. That they share a certain capacity for commentary, or for understanding, for interpretation, and really that's the heart of what I'm here to say to you, that literature and Levinas and others are important readers that what we're offering is a way of reading, which we call by a name that sounds trivial, close reading. Call it close reading, to read closely, to read, and to use the Levinasian term, phenomenologically. What is phenomenology? Phenomenology has been defined as within a philosophic context as a way of thinking about actions rather than about meanings. About one of the ways in which it's been named is in the philosophy of Edmund Husserl as intentionalities, as ways of thinking about activities, not so much what I have in my mind, but what I have as an agenda. Not simply what's in my mind, but what I'm doing. It's forms of doing. So what we looked at, as you might sense from the materials that have been available online, we looked at Sophocles' play Oedipus Tyrannus. We looked at philosophy of Levinas, and then we looked at Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus. Then we looked at the Bacchae by Euripides, ancient. Then we looked at Shakespeare's Othello, and then we looked at Dostoevsky's Dream of a Ridiculous Man. And these many writers, these four writers, all seem to be engaged in what we're calling commentary. You know, my first book was entitled Sacrificing Commentary, the ways in which we give up the commentary in order to become literary critics who claim to know something about what they're reading, but in fact are expelling the commentary that's already available to us in literary reading. And it seems to me that Levinas's approach to philosophy is exactly the same. That philosophy, of course, comes, as we all know, from Plato and from Aristotle and from thinking about the ancient world, and often talked about in terms of a notion of interpretation that goes something like this. There's a truth that has to do with being, and there's what appears to be or what seems to be, and this what seems to be may or may not be what in fact is truth. And we have to, our goal is to get to the true, and maybe if we have time, to get to the good beyond being. But in fact, what our real goal is really to get to this truth, and to get through the seeming, and to hope that seeming is not all, in fact, all there is, because what we're really looking for in this traditional understanding of philosophy is truth. Levinas changes all that. Levinas's view is that what we have to do is something more like what religious texts have been doing, which is to say, not to look in for the truth, but to look at context, to look at where things have come from and what is the strategies that they're employing and where they're going and what's likely to happen as a concept of this. To look the way that a medical doctor would look at symptoms, rather than to look at something for its truth or its being or its way of functioning in the world, to ask ourselves, of what is it already an expression or reflection, and what are the consequences of the fact that it's already an expression or consequences, which may or may not come about, but seem to be implicit in the very possibility of thinking that way. And so I want to begin this discussion with the talk about a grasshopper. A grasshopper walks into a bar, and he says to the bartender, "Could I have a drink?" And the bartender says to him, "You know, we have a drink in here named after you." And the grasshopper says, "You know, why would anyone want to name a drink Bob?" It seems to me that raises the kinds of issues that we're trying to raise here. We suspend our disbelief in order to say that, okay, a grasshopper walks into a bar. We understand what that means. But as soon as we do that, we forget that if we're doing that, this person has an existence and is a personal relationship, and when that personal relationship is appealed to, you know, we have a drink in here named after you. You've come in here a lot, and why would anyone want to name Bob? My name is Bob. You know, that then we realize that we've in fact made ourselves subject to something that is already a kind of fiction. The other thing that we've been talking about within a similar fiction, but it has to do more directly with philosophy, is is Descartes, René Descartes. Most famously says, "Je pense donc que je suis." I think, therefore I am, which was a kind of response to Anselm, rather than God thinks, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am, which is the Cartesian response to the theological. So Descartes walks into a bar, and the bartender says, "Would you care for a drink, sir?" And he says, "I think not," and disappears. Again, it's the relationship of the fiction that we think we suspend the fiction in order to realize, in order to only in the joke to be forced again to confront the fact that it's a fiction, and that philosophy is as much a fiction as anything else. What Levinas is trying to get us, we were talking about this before, what Levinas is trying to get us to think about is the radical otherness, the radical alterity, the radical exteriority of the other individual. It's hard to get that idea, but the first big book of Levinas is Totality and Infinity, and in that book, in the English translation, is a subtitle, an essay on radical exteriority. What is radical exteriority? One of the examples that Levinas gives in a book called, in English translation again, Existence and Existence, E-N-C-E and E-N-T-S. As you said, you were away on a trip and you come back and you're coming down the hill. And I remember feeling exactly this when I left. I was at Cornell for a while, and in Ithaca, and I went away and I came back down the hill, it enters into Ithaca, and exactly felt this. You're there and you're not there. It's like a place without qualities for the first second or two. You look at it and you've been away for like 3 or 4 months, thinking of other things and constructing other narratives in your mind. And you look at it and it has no qualities. It's just simply there. It's what Levinas calls the there is, the ilia, the there is. And he says that responsibility is a response to the there is. Responsibility is a response to the there is. It's that capacity to respond. It's the capacity to make a difference. The notion of difference is used throughout the humanities. I think, in fact, I think it's used throughout the sciences as well, as a methodology. We think of difference, of boundaries, of limitations, of separation as a difference. Right? And Levinas says that that responsibility has to be understood as non-indifference, and he uses then a Kantian word, which you may have heard. Kant says that we have to think with disinterestedness, and Levinas will take that word and break it up and say disinterestedness, and break it into 4 parts. To disinter means to unbury, as if our normal way of thinking is that we are buried in being, in estedness. Est comes from Latin being. To est means to be. And so we're buried in being. And responsibility is disinterestedness, is the capacity to unbury ourselves from this buriedness in being. Non-indifference, disinterestedness, response to the ilia. There's a very famous, now deceased writer, Terence Dupre, who makes an introductory commentary to a book by a friend of mine, Ellen Fine, called The Legacy of Night, which is an account of the work of Elie Wiesel. And in the introduction, he says what is needed in talking about a disaster like the Shoah is a French notion of conscience. Conscience in French can mean consciousness, or it can mean conscience, which is conscience morale, is conscience, what we would call conscience, and conscience is consciousness. Same word, but it can mean either. What we need is a word like that automatically means both consciousness and conscience. So this is not a matter, as I suggested in Plato, we separate the ethical from consciousness, but rather for Levinas, it's a way of understanding consciousness as already an embarkment upon the ethical, as already an embodiment, if you like, of the ethical. So ethics for Levinas, it's common for him to say, is first philosophy, by which he means that ethics replaces what we would customarily think of as first philosophy, namely, I am a subject of consciousness before objects of knowledge. I am myself a subject of consciousness before objects of knowledge. And Levinas has to say, no, the ethical and somehow precedes that subject of consciousness before objects of knowledge. And it also precedes being, so or frees itself from being. Levinas has a reading of Martin Heidegger, who says that ontology, he agrees with Levinas that the metaphysical consciousness of knowledge before of objects before consciousness of subjects of consciousness before objects of knowledge cannot be first. Heidegger agrees with Levinas on that. But Heidegger will say that what is fundamental is being, and he calls that the conatus essendi. The conatus essendi is a word that's found in Leibniz, actually. And in Leibniz, Leibniz asks the most famous question, perhaps of all philosophy: why is there being rather? Why is there something rather than nothing? And the answer Martin Heidegger gives is there's not. There's not being rather than nothing. There's being as nothing. That nothing appears as being, and if we move away that being, we understand that nothing. But what comes to us as being, and we live in the pursuit, for Heidegger, of being. Levinas wants to challenge that idea as well as this traditional metaphysics. So he challenges Heidegger's fundamental ontology. He challenges the fundamental prior fundamental metaphysics, and he introduces the ethical as primary metaphysics. An ethical that's not simply a matter of guilt, and it's not simply a matter of empathy, but is a matter of a description of my fundamental obligation to the other individual, insofar as the other individual, like myself, is human. So it's the discovery of the human. It's the breakthrough of the human into, if you like, the potential philosophic suppression of that human. Levinas is fond of saying we're not autonomies. We're not individuals, meaning autonomies, self-namers, auto and nomos, self-namers. But we're heteronomies. We come from the other. We come from the other. The chapter 14 of Otherwise Than Being, Autrement qu'être, ou au-delà de l'ontology, is the chapter 4 from Autrement qu'être is about gestation, is about the fact that the other, it's always a relationship of gestation that's going on, and that the other is always an extension of me, rather than here I am. We see there I am, because in the other individual is myself. And Levinas, when he turns to the religious formulations of these things, for example, in Leviticus, he'll say something like, it's not loving the other as yourself, but loving the other is yourself. Not loving the other as yourself, but loving the other is yourself, or loving the other as yourself insofar as means is. We are, with regard to the other, something like hostage status. We are subjected to the other. For Levinas, again, we're just reading, understanding Levinas in this context. Then we're going to turn to the article. We have a hostage status. We have our subjectivity is a subjection to the ethical, which we have the choice of denying or acknowledging. We do not have the choice of rejecting. In that regard, Levinas is in contest with Jean-Paul Sartre, because Sartre argues in an article, famous article called "Existentialism is a Humanism," that we are first free, and then we freely adopt responsibility or choose not to. But for Levinas, that's not the responsibility that he's talking about. It's the responsibility prior to freedom that determines what our freedom is. That for Levinas, and in fact for Sartre, freedom is always negative. Freedom is always négation in French. It's always the capacity to undo, as if we are always already doing. We're always already finding ourselves within a doing. We're never free, in fact, standing as that subject of consciousness before objects of knowledge. We have to work at undoing that relationship in which we find ourselves. And so we approach this this essay by Lazar Benaroyo, and it's just to give us some thinking about this as a way of setting the stage for this discussion that we're going to have once we take a look at some of the ideas in this this little essay, for thinking about what medical practice could look like if we were to take seriously Levinas's notion of responsibility, of the fundamental practice. What would practice look like? What would it be like? How would we focus? Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The water of life. Thank you. So, for example, this is in page 330 of this essay. I'm giving the page so that Vitas can find this for him. We can put it up on the 330. So I guess it would be the next page here. The first column, to return to our inquiry. No, that's, I guess it's the page after that. It's yeah, keep going. There we go. I think we got it. Significance. So you had it there a minute ago. Okay, there 330. Okay, there we go. Significance of Levinas ethics for medical judgment. To return to our inquiry centered on philosophic basis of medical care, it's worth noting this inescapable condition is for Levinas, first of all, reflected in the human sense of corporeality, the human sense of corporeality that is vulnerability, rather than as a detached game of consciousness, which is what I've said to you. And this vulnerability, I'll just tell you in advance so that you're not held waiting, comes through the face. For Levinas, the notion of vulnerability, of nakedness in a non-erotic sense, of defenselessness, utter defenselessness, is the face. The face is an expression of this defenselessness. The face says, Levinas tells us, thou shalt not kill. The face is a saying. That's why Levinas will argue that language, in its capacity to be a saying, is ethical, is exercising the ethical, insofar as it's exercising the saying, not the said. The said is meaning and is the compilation of ideas and on top of meanings, but it's the saying, it's the act of saying. The said is, gathers together and we can look at it and debate it and argue it back and forth, but it's really the saying that constitutes the ethical behavior, the saying. And the face itself is a saying. It's a doing. It's an expressing. And Levinas says the incarnated subject experienced as vulnerability, as a face, rather than as a detached game of consciousness, is for Levinas the place of the call for the other, of an inescapable call before any choice, as I said to you, before the birth of liberty or Sartrean freedom. Embodiment as vulnerability is the cornerstone of Levinas's moral approach. The body, whether healthy or ill, experienced as vulnerability, is the locus of my exposure to others, to the others. A call for responsibility. Again, not a responsibility assumed by a conscious decision, important, but an inescapable call, not a free choice, but the condition, ethical condition of my own self. For Levinas, responsibility is revealed by the other's face. There it is, by the other's face. The face of the other reminds us that the ethical meaning of an encounter is not totally contained within the limits of consciousness or within the social superstructures of a world of moral strangers. Levinas is fond of saying that what he's doing is as I said initially, phenomenology of sociality. All of the people with whom I became interested when I first encountered Levinas, among others, and I'm naming here mostly, I think maybe entirely actually French, or at least I encountered them in France. Some of them come from elsewhere. but Claude Lévi-Strauss, Jacques Lacan, Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, René Girard, Emmanuel Levinas, Roland Barthes. All these French figures all emphasize a sociality, socialité in French, that is not simply the gathering together of the parts of individualities or individual psychologies, but is something distinct, absolutely distinct from this collection of individualities. And these ideas in France come directly from Émile Durkheim in the 19th century and his sociology. The idea that the sacred is not made up of the gathering together of psychologies, but that is something separate, something which we could name, and the French actually do name it, le symbolique. What we say when we say symbolic, we often mean simply metaphoric or something that doubles on the figurative. No, the symbolique for Durkheim and for these guys is something distinct from the realm of the individual head, what goes on in what is called by them l'imaginaire, the imaginary. The imaginary is not simply the seeming, it's everything that goes on in the head. The imaginary is everything that goes on in the head. Jacques Lacan kind of formalizes this in his psychoanalytic treatment. He calls it RSI, the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. He said those are the registers in which we function. But what's important is that there's a middle ground, and this middle ground is the middle ground of sociality, which is different from the real, whatever is really outside of culture, another version of absolute difference from culture, not difference from another person, but difference from culture itself. There are various versions of radical externality. The real for these guys is radical externality. They actually call it the impossible, because the cultural is what's possible, whereas what's outside of the culture is what's not possible. So they call it l'impossible. The real, they say, it's a funny phrase to hear, but the real is impossible. Right? But the social is, if you like, is the radical other of the individual, and this is simply an internal relationship. But Levinas will use this radical alterity of social relations and its place within the elemental universe, also in relationship between two people. So I look at the other, and the other is simply a function of my ego, is a function of, it's more of the same. It's the other is another version of me, except that it's not me. It's the non-self, the other as the non-self. That's what they call the other with the small o. And Levinas will distinguish that other with the small o from autrui. The other, l'autre is the other with the small o. Autrui is the neighbor, who's radically other, who's doing the same thing I'm doing, standing next to me, but I'm not acknowledging that individual because I'm just thinking about them from the point of view of myself, not from the point of view of radical externality, which is somehow how I have to begin to think for Levinas and these others. I'm just giving you a little bit background to all right, so let's go back to this paragraph. Levinas's view, facing suffering. So now what do Levinas's foundations of ethics mean in the realm of ethical care? What does it mean? In Levinas's view, facing suffering reveals my own humanity. Within a space of shared vulnerability, of familiarity, of fragility. It's on the basis of this Levinasian approach to suffering, conceived of as a dialectic between the interpellation of the patient and the availability of the carer, that a climate of trust can blossom. Levinas talks about suffering in a very odd way. There's an essay called The Useless Suffering, which sounds really strange. It's in Entre Nous, a couple of other places as well. And he says, suffering is radical abiding. Radical abiding. We shall not suffer this to happen anymore. But we use that notion of suffering as abiding, living with, and radical abiding. He calls it a passivity more passive than the opposite of active. A passivity more passive than the opposite of active. Radical abiding. Which means that it's radical, which is why we can't, in some sense, gain access to the suffering of the other. Which is something we've all known. That's one of the premises of our understanding of suffering is that the suffering in some sense isolates us. So it's not a way of saying, okay, yes, I share your suffering. Sympathy won't do it. Sympathy is not enough. There's something radical, more radical than is needed than simply sympathy. Sympathy is helpful, is a way of thinking in the right direction, but it's not enough for Levinas.
Can we say that suffering is in the realm of real?
Yeah. Suffering approaches the realm of the real. Yeah. So empathy is not enough because that's simply a cultural style.
And if you want to describe it, we get into symbolic.
Right. That's right. I agree with that. The truth. All right. So then it says, my ethical responsibility as a caregiver includes both a response to the interpolation elicited by the call of the other and a movement of self-reflection, the source of acceptance of the suffering other, the acceptance of the suffering other. The true visitation of the patient beyond the clinically codified visit implies accepting his radical otherness, accepting his or her radical otherness, welcoming him or her into myself in a movement of hospitality. And it's a very important word for Levinas, a movement of welcome, hospitality. I mean, think about the notion of, you talk about the medical hospitality, welcome, it contains it. It's already there. What do we mean by a hospital, but precisely a place of welcome? I'm a stranger in a strange land. What I'm looking for is welcome. There is a movement of hospitality that mobilizes my own vulnerability. When Levinas passed away, Jacques Derrida was at the funeral and spoke for 4 hours. People were kind of nonplussed. 4 hours he spoke, which is not unusual for Derrida, but this was really beyond the pale. And what he spoke about, and he then published his essay on which was really his speech, his saying on as adieu to God, goodbye, but also adieu to God, adieu. And he emphasized in adieu hospitality. That was his Derrida's reading of Levinas. One has to think of Levinas in terms of hospitality, and Benaroyo has picked up that notion. So that's going to be a theme, one of the themes of Benaroyo's notion: welcome, hospitality. But I mention it because it's so close to the notion of the medical. I mean, do we not use medical? But you understand that hospitality is based on the word hostis. And hostis means army. It means, and it's also the same word for guest. The guest and the host. The host is the army. But is the person a host or a guest? A host, in some sense, is hosting. And is welcoming, but an army can also, we also refer to that, and they rallied the host, the army. It also refers to the army. So hospitality is raising all these notions of welcome as opposed to armies, and what we're in a kind of ongoing warfare. I think of the opening words of Levinas's 1961 book, Totality and Affinity, that, will any of us doubt that it's important to figure out whether being is in a constant warfare? That's the opening of Levinas's 1961 book, that we may need to figure out whether we're in constant warfare with the other. Yeah.
Okay, now there's a question.
Yeah.
If you talk about welcoming the other, the appearance of the other, then how could we imagine, for example, when patient comes to the ward, a doctor and everyone says, "Welcome to our hospital," and I don't know how would the patient react to this, and would that be possible?
And so it's exactly the question that he raises, and his response will be the following on the next column. He says, what does this way of conceiving of responsibility for the other mean in terms of practice, medical practice, exactly? And he says, Levinas points out the faithfulness of the responsibility requires a personal, in clinical medicine, the unfolding of responsibility for the other entails, here, this is number one, being aware of the radical otherness of the other, which is what we're trying to emphasize here, as well as the same time of the common vulnerability that links physician and patient, namely to the inescapable responsibility that one owes to the other. But as Levinas points out, the faithfulness of the responsibility requires in turn a personal availability. And then he's going to say a third thing. And the third thing is going to be the face. Is what we read, what we respond to is the face of the other. And the face is a gateway. And Levinas calls this gateway the gateway to the infinite within the finite. It's a notion that he borrows from Franz Rosenzweig. He's reading Buber, he's reading Rosenzweig, and Buber and Rosenzweig refer to each other kind of a love relationship from about 1918 to 1923, 24. Then when Rosenzweig gets sick, they're not talking quite as much, but they're still translating the Torah, the Bible, Hebrew Bible together. But during this period of time, Rosenzweig has been writing, he's saying, and he writes a book, and I'm simply giving you the theme of the book, the Star of Redemption. It's a book called The Star of Redemption in English, and it says that all of the relations in the world are either matters of relations to God, or matters of relations to human beings, or matters of relations to the world. But rather than figure out which is the most important, maybe we should just understand the relationship of one to the other. So I'm going to just draw this here. We say there's a relationship to God. I'm going to use that as a G, and a relationship to human beings here, human beings, and the relationship to the world. So you see, well, just a triangle here. And then we could say, okay, relationship to God and to human beings, and to human beings to the world, and to the world of God. Well, what is the relationship of God to human beings? Well, it's presumably it's creation. What God does with regard to human beings is create, and then that creation, it's up to human beings to spread that, and so we can call that revelation. This is Rosenzweig, call that revelation, and that revelation will lead, hopefully, to some kind of, for Rosenzweig, redemption. But rather than say, okay, we're going to focus either on God or the world, or the Hebrew, or human beings, how about if we bring them all together and we make a star like this? And so you get the Hebrew star. It calls the Star of Redemption. But it's the infinite. He said these are all versions of the infinite within the finite. Creation is the infinite. The infinite means in this context the unlimited. It's not a place. It's a kind of non-place, but it's a singularity with regard to a non-place. It's the impossibility of naming a place in a number system, for example. The infinite. It's when the possibility of naming breaks down. It's a singular, what's called in science singularity. And so the infinite creation is for Rosenzweig the infinite within the finite, which leads to the revelation of the infinite within the finite, which leads to a redemption as a consequence of this revelation of the infinite within the finite. Always the creative process of God. Okay, so that's kind of background here for Levinas's understanding that what we do in medical practice is try to explore the face in order to get some commonality of our experience of the infinite within the finite. Why are we doing any of this? I'm just going to again remind us of another idea of Levinas, which is that we have not one but three responsibilities. Three responsibilities. We have a responsibility to the others, which is infinite. Can you imagine more than that? All right. We have another responsibility to the other that's infinite. We have a responsibility for the other's responsibility. I mean, like a parent to a child, raising a child. We have a responsibility for their responsibility. We have a responsibility, Levinas says, for the passing or living, the life or death of the other individual, in addition to their responsibility and responsibility for them I always wondered what could that mean? It seems to me the medical context is the context in which we can understand that. And this was Gavidas, who seems to be absolutely brilliant. He's saying to me, he says, Sandy, we should form a series of lectures around this idea of medical practice as the responsibility for the life or death of the other. And it seems to me exactly that's what we're doing. That's the origin of this, of our meeting and what's going on here, as I understand it. And so how do we take responsibility for the other's life or death? But isn't that something like what we used to call the Hippocratic Oath? Isn't that precisely what we used to call the Hippocratic Oath? So how would this differ? And this is, I'm raising this as much as a question as it's not like I have an answer for this, but as much a question. It seems to me that there's a way in which we are making ourselves vulnerable. And maybe that's the answer. It's not simply that we're responsible for their life or death, but for our own life or death implicated in their life or death. Maybe that's what's really going on here. It's our own implication. And that was an extremely difficult thing for us to think about. Because can we ask of a doctor or our medical students in Lithuanian medical school to perform as if their life or death is at stake in what is going on? And yet, isn't that what acting is about? Isn't that what performance is about? Do not, when someone stands up on the stage and says, I am Julius Caesar, they're not lying. They're acting, but acting is a form of lying. I mean, lying means telling something that we don't think to be true. In fact, and in order to shield us from, that's what an actor is doing, is saying something that the actor knows is not true. I am Julius Caesar. It's a form of lying. Isn't that, but it's a form of lying that also enacts a kind of truth that's other than this truth of representation. It enacts the truth of where things are going, where they've come from, and what strategies are being employed. So in some sense, a doctor has to become, it's going to sound funny to say this, doctor has to become an actor, has to become really experienced, sincere, truthful performer about their own vulnerability. I mean, this is how I'm reading what I'm Benaroyo here. Benaroyo's application of Levinasian ideas to medical practice, this is. I suggest to you just simply an idea that, as I say, it's just coming up. I'm not proclaiming this. I'm not arguing that Levinas is saying this. This is something that Vidas and I talked about before, and so maybe at this point we should stop and open the floor to the discussion, which seems to me, unless there are questions about what we said so far.
Yeah, probably the question would be based on what you say about this lying, or no, probably lying is not the proper thing. Probably here we deal with role playing.
Role play.
You take the role, and so what's within the role of a doctor?
Yeah, probably.
And maybe that would be helpful when we always talk, that doctors get exhausted, they experience burnout, like empathy, compassion fatigue, the so-called.
Yes.
And would it be okay if doctors, let's say, didn't take that too personal? For example, I feel sorry for you, but in reality, I feel sorry for you as a doctor.
Yeah,
not just as John or Mary or something like that.
Yeah, because we're not asking the doctor to say, I will go to the grave for you. I will. Although that may be in another context what we would ask, or what they would like to do, especially if the child is a it's a relative. Can I just interject something? There's another. I tend to function in terms of jokes, and here's another joke. A man is riding has a sad tone to it. A man is riding with his son. There's a terrible accident. And the son is really severely injured. The man is injured but less injured. Ambulance comes, takes him to the hospital. The doctor comes out, takes one look at the child and says, I can't operate on him. He's my son. What's going on?
Is a mother.
She's the mother. Exactly. She's the mother. Exactly. Yeah.
Luckily, we have at least one doctor around our company. So, Professor, what do you think? Is it possible to find some balance? Being sincere, caring for patients, but also not taking maybe too personally, because that might lead to serious consequences to yourself. How to care of others without damaging your personal life. How to find this balance?
Yeah, so that's, if we have to take a citation from the article, I made a line for myself, how it's to create a space for otherness in oneself.
Mhm.
So it means if I am a physician, or other healthcare professional, I think we can speak about nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists who are dealing with also very sick persons. So I think we can generalize that we are talking about healthcare professionals, everyone who is in the healthcare system. So, and your question is, so how big is a space?
Yeah.
Of this otherness in myself, and I think that's the depth of empathy I can create with that. So it's I think it definitely we have to have this space for other people's suffering, but how big is do I have much place for others suffering, and it means that there is no space for myself. And I think that's the way to get burnout. So I don't know exact answer for that, because I think it's very very difficult and to find the balance, because it's for me always it's a very subtle line to become a cynic and not to react to other suffering. So where is the line of that? And when at the beginning we talked about this vulnerability, so if to take a patient and medical personnel, let's say, so a patient is vulnerable because of a disease, or disorder. And my vulnerability as a physician, so, my empathy, but what I found in the article, it was, for me, like a light came, that my vulnerability is my responsibility in a way.
Mhm.
But here it comes, this also objectivity and subjectivity, how deeply I can take that vulnerability of the patient and to be still objective in performing something, because we started about performing. So I cannot be just compassionate and cry together with all family. So where is again the line that, taking into account suffering, but also with bright mind, acting according all my knowledge and doing it.
Yeah, this is like duality. You
Very much.
separate. It's like two things that you cannot just separate and talk about differently. It's you need to combine all of this, and probably Gary deal with some sort of art. You need to have some practice and
Practical wisdom,
practical
as they say.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Whoa,
Practical wisdom.
just a remark. Practical wisdom over there.
Continue.
I'm just stuck with the conclusion. Yeah, by listening to what has been said, here is the conclusion of the article itself. Yeah. The responsible healer has a double face of Janus. On the one side, the naturalistic rational attitude. Here we go. To recall, and on the other side, The personal free rational attitude entails hospitality to welcome the other vulnerability as an ethical calling. Quite an equation.
Yeah.
Drawing the lines. So now, how to draw the line?
Could the line be drawn in accord with Levinas's what I call chapter 4, which actually may be chapter 3 of Article Montet, in which he says that the other is my relation to the other is the gestation of the other in me, that the other is an extension of me, is my extension, and maybe that's the capacity. It's a friend of mine who's a theologian calls it kind of supernatality. It's a way in which I can imagine performatively or enacting as if the other is my child, is an extension of me. Maybe that's the means by which I can think of a continuity of my bodily embodiment with the embodiment of the other in front of me. Maybe that's how I can get something closer to that depth that we're talking about.
May I have some more question?
Yeah.
About like referring to the question how big this space should be. Another question: what is the maximum number of such a spaces you are supposed to have not to burn down? Because it's like serious like performance like takes some effort. So and like it builds some kind of like strong connection, but it's okay if you have one patient, but you already can burn down. But if you have like a lot of them, and nowadays the system like can be changed, so doctors not always leaving the patient from the beginning to the end, or the like doctors change. So is it there like enough time, like human therapy, the surgeons, and the anesthesiologists, and the other? Is everyone should build this connection with the patient, and if patient is supposed to build this connection with each the doctors it needs, and what is the maximum number of connections for one person?
Yeah.
But isn't that if you talk again about welcoming, yeah? So a welcoming atmosphere, doesn't that mean that each time any health professional, within the team meets the patient, he demonstrates welcoming attitude. Well, hello, I'm happy to see you, and so on. And that means that, here again, we probably cannot count, how many, that would be similar, how many children, what would be the maximum of children you should have in order you could stay safe or alive or something like that. Probably that's, if you would ask mother, they probably would say, no, it's infinite number, that doesn't count like this, that now I dedicated. Yeah, now there's a joke, that sounds like this, that each week I dedicate 100% of me in my work. On Monday, 10%, on Tuesday, 20%, and so on. So that's not like that. Yes, it's not like calculus. It's not a quantity, thing, but probably we deal with some qualities. But can't we talk, that can't we assume that if you talk about taking responsibility, then again, you take responsibility as a doctor or as a nurse or as a physiotherapist or something like that. That means that isn't that it's within your responsibility to understand, it's like cognitive empathy. It's like within my responsibility to recognize the suffering patient, feel sorry for that, and look for ways to help the patient in rational ways, find rational ways of helping the patient. And isn't that enough? Or do I need to look at each patient as something as that's intruding my being? No. What do you think, Sandor?
I think that's the question we have to address. And I consider my role here as is giving you the way or a way that Levinas offers us to think about it as a method for thinking, which has to do with the face, as we said, and has to do with what we really haven't talked about quite as much as reading. That's what we went on with the literary, close reading of the circumstances. But how we determine it is probably where we get limited by, if you like, by the symbolic, by the sociality in which we're involved in a certain cultural setting in which certain things are imposed upon us, certain things that may be more or less related to profit margins or large corporations, which say that we have to have fewer doctors serve more patients so that we can make more money to develop more drugs and blah blah blah, and have political campaigns and so forth. So that it becomes how we negotiate. Maybe there may be no answers. In other words, there may be simply it may be simply enough to understand that the goal is the ethical, whether we can achieve it or not. In other words, it remains the goal, whether or not we can achieve it. It's not a matter of you're a bad person if you don't achieve the ethical. It's not a matter of prescribing it or of advocating it. It's a matter of understanding in a more nuanced fashion what it is that we're trying to do, perhaps than we have been understanding it in the past, and recognizing what's at stake, which may enable us to be more careful in what we do.
I guess we forgot that there are others behind the camera. And so please, if you would like to give a question or to give a comment, please raise a hand and I will give you permission to do that. Unlock your mic. Also, please, you feel free to share your ideas on chat. We will read and we will try to react. So please feel free to interact with us. And okay, but now another question that comes to my mind. Did I understand correctly? I may not be right, but isn't that when you talk about the other, isn't that the fact that the intrusion of the other creates me as, or constitutes me as a subject or subjectivity? It's like, now, if there were no others, then would I be able to, how to say, to describe myself as someone?
It is a fact that we are born from the other.
No.
It's hard. It seems to me hard to get around that. Yeah. We are from the other.
And when you talk about medical contexts, usually what we deal, health practitioners, they face intrusion of the other. You cannot choose the other. With whom would you like to deal with? You cannot choose, let's say, or just to talk or communicate with pleasant people or something like that. There might be a lot of you don't know who comes. And isn't that relevant? You can't control. Who is the other?
Yeah, maybe it's a relationship that we have to engage not only in terms of what's in front of us, but what we can remember in our history as well. In other words, there's a different dimension. As a doctor, we tend to, as a medical doctor, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a philosophic or whatever, my PhD, whatever my mother thinks of myself as a doctor, but that's a different discussion. But doctoring may not be simply a matter of observing what's in front of us, or even a matter only of the space I can create by virtue of what's in front of us, but the space that I can create by virtue of my history, and where I might be going as a doctor, as a person, as a human being. And so it seems to me that we always operate within a history as well, and a memory, as well as a a field of experiences. You know, I was listening to a discussion of AI, artificial intelligence, and one of the criticism that was raised, they said we can now surpass the Turing test. We know we've gotten beyond Alan Turing and the tests, and we actually can ChatGPT 4.0 or 5.0, whatever it is that we can do. We're past that already. But nonetheless, we are not and may never be to a place that we think of as understanding. Our computation capacity may be quite in excess, but we may not be in terms of understanding, perhaps because we don't have memory, and perhaps because AI does not have memory. It can't say, well, when I was a little AI, when I was just a tyke, a little tyke, this is what I did,
I wouldn't agree with that.
You wouldn't? Go ahead. Yeah.
Because AI just everything is the memory of AI. It's pure memory. And also, if you talk about AI, nowadays we know that NVIDIA, altogether with Hippocratic AI, they have created a virtual nurse.
Yeah.
And research data show that usually even nurses in some points rated this virtual nurse as better, as compared to human nurses.
Right.
So that means maybe we won't need other anymore.
But here's the question. I mean, I understand that algorithms seem to be to have a memory, but this is an issue that came up in a book that I just finished putting together with someone, in which they were reading novels about one by a Japanese individual who was born and moved to England when he was 2. I think it's Mazuo Ishiguro, Clara and the Sun, and which is about sympathetic AIs that interact with people who are dying, and gives a narrative, and it's a narrative which I think Ishiguro makes clear, even though it's entirely algorithmically based, does sound like it's sympathy, and yet there's something missing. And perhaps what's missing is that continuity, that this other thing didn't come from the same, and didn't come from a body, and can only talk in terms that it's learned, or he, she, or it has learned to talk. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm just, I don't have I don't have a commitment on this, but I have just a way of thinking that there's something that's not that it seems to me Ishiguro wants to make clear, that's missing from this deeply sympathetic, algorithmically based machine that wants to find a space for sympathy for this dying girl that it's assigned, that this machine has been assigned to take care of, and then the machine will simply be put away in the trash can somewhere. And
but again,
yeah,
I would say that I would say that, for example, okay, even if you assume that maybe there's something fake in AI communication, but can we be sure that there's nothing fake in human communication? Can you distinguish fakeness? For example, someone may just say, I love you, but in reality, he or she doesn't care about this person, and that's it. Now, for example, digital nurse, a virtual nurse, at least she can repeat you the same information for as many times as without patience. With patience, without getting irritated or something like that, and even at least the digital AI fakes caring attitude towards you.
Performs, is a good actor. Performs.
So what would you choose? Fake caring attitude or authentic rude attitudes? Human rudeness, against artificial fakeness or artificial sincerity.
Yeah, but isn't that a different question? I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I completely agree with you. That isn't that though a different question whether or not we would prefer a digital nurse? I mean, yes, it seems to me I would like an AI that knows every possible outcome of this disease that I have that when I show up as a patient. You know, much better than a doctor who says, well, you take an aspirin, call me in the morning, and you know that. And a caring digital nurse would be terrific. But does that, I guess the question is, and maybe here we're going beyond, I don't know, beyond Levinas, or certainly, or maybe beyond Benaroyo. But do we have some access to what we've been calling the ethical? Do we have? I mean, is or maybe I'll put it in the form of a question. Levinas, are you saying that to some extent a digital nurse makes the ethical unnecessary?
Why not?
Okay. Okay.
May I ask one question?
Yeah.
But is it about doctor or AI, or it's more about patient? Why patient? Because like we as human beings, we want to be loved, we want to be understood, we want to be like something. And with human doctor, we can hope that we will be understood, that we will be loved, etc. But with AI, we know in advance that it's not like a human being which is not capable of like showing any kind of human emotion. So maybe it's not about the performer, but about the audience.
The audience, yeah.
Yeah. Why we talk about Turing test, you know, if someone calls me and asks me how I'm going on, and so am I taking pills and so on, and if I cannot distinguish, you know, whether that was a human or AI, then you know we can say that this AI passes Turing test, and I feel welcomed. I feel that it was so genuine.
Yeah.
Experience from my perspective. And then this question: is there any difference, you know, between what's the essence of human or ethical, as you say?
But it works if you don't know that you're talking to AI. So is it ethical to make you talk to AI, not knowing that you're talking to AI? Because if you know that you're talking to AI, it will not fool you.
Okay, but why ruin everything? And yeah.
So what you're asking is the Nietzschean question, you know, really in a kind of fundamental way, which is, do we need the ethical?
Yeah, and this is the main. Yeah. Okay, now our discourse turned, you know, towards AI and so on. But again, there's a question: what could be indicators of the ethical? You know, what is this genuine? You know, that's common to humans or to pure mind. Yeah, Professor.
Oh, I'm just thinking that maybe that word, this vulnerability, you know, because if you are vulnerable as, you know, as a medical professional, you are sensitive in this way. And if you are sensitive, you will be sensitive to, you know, patient needs, you know, suffering, family needs. So I think for me, this word vulnerability in this positive meaning, you know, that I am thinking, I am feeling. And I think in nowadays, we are afraid to be vulnerable because it seems to be that we are inferior, or we might be damaged ourselves. But in that, you know, positive meaning, that vulnerability, it's sensitivity. And also I was, you know, reflecting when you said about the resilience, because I think this burnout, now it's next word is resilience, you know, how we can get out of this situation. And I was looking at the text, and I think like today's discussion and what we're doing, we can build our resilience through philosophy, connecting ethics and clinical practice. I mean, so it's resilience, not only my skills, you know, how to survive and how to behave in certain clinical situations, But, well, of course, there is this term mental, psychological resilience, but I think, getting these, ethical issues into my mind, into my understanding, also can increase my resilience in clinical practice. And understanding, that yes, I am vulnerable, I can have limited space for this otherness in myself in a way, and I need others to survive and to be, the word was said, heteronomous. I like it very much. I am not autonomous. I am not autonomous. And like in I'm geriatrician. And very often we are talking about, independence as something to be superior. But, on the other hand, I think it's interdependence. And that's beautiful word, that we are totally interdependent from each other in real life. Because, okay, I cannot replace my car tire, so I am dependent on someone, and that's nice. So in a way to find that, being dependent, being vulnerable, it's okay. And I think that's part of our clinical practice.
Yeah, great insights.
I mean, what we're asking is whether the ethical is good. What we're asking really is whether the ethical is good. And we're, to some extent, we've been assuming in this discussion, I think Levinas is probably assuming that it's a better way to get at the good beyond being, to go through responsibility than to go through Heidegger's analysis of being. But is that goal the goal, or should we simply think of ourselves as robotic technical machines that, if we can get a digital nurse to do, create in us everything that another human being can do or is capable of doing, then maybe that's sufficient. I think that's the question. I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's the question that we're asking, which is, I think, a really interesting question.
Can I interrupt? So also, just following our professor's ideas, I think the main question for us as philosophers, because majority of us, except our dean, are more or less philosophers. So the main question is how to translate these sometimes very abstract and sometimes quite vague philosophical ideas, like in this article, into medical judgment.
Yes.
What we are talking. And the thing is that, for example, asking for ultimate responsibility from health professionals, it looks a little bit like too much demanding, probably, and maybe not realistic, and maybe even too much sophisticated and so on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the question, and for us, is not a question of responsibility, because if starting from Hippocratic Oath or looking to other ethical codes, actually we have this that health professionals are responsible for this, that, and many things. Yeah? Mm-hmm. But the question is how to maybe prove, or how to justify, or how to explain that responsibility does really matters in professional practice. Yeah, I mean, what does it take in particular? What does it mean for me as professional? Like you started already to discuss that. I think this is the point, translating, because Levinas ideas, I think they are very much like sometimes they when Levinas talks about responsibility to other, meeting other space and so on, mm-hmm. It might be understood in very narrow sense, in very narrow meaning. That, okay, I just meet a patient in some kind of clinical setting, and here I'm somehow should be responsible, and I don't know, to make this relationship welcome and so on and so on, what you said many times. But the question is, what does it really mean in terms that I could meet, different situations and different people and so on. And then it seems that this request from or this ethics, Levinas ethics. So we are not we are not skeptical, but we are trying just to understand Levinas ideas and how to implicate into clinical practice. So sometimes it looks like impossible, like mission impossible, to do it. And the question is how we can maybe again, I use this word to translate in right way how these ideas can really be implemented into practice. And what does it take? I mean, what is behind those nice words and very meaningful words, of course, yeah. But because from our practitioners, for example, in continuing medical education, we meet practitioners and they say, okay, we believe, we know that what we have to do, we know all ethical commitments and so on. But, reality is a little bit different thing. For example, you meet just aggressive patient and this aggressive patient offends and so cries on nurses, for example, yeah, and so on. So how should we respond, And sometimes we even do not have a right answer what to tell. I mean, what ethics or philosophy in general can suggest dealing with very, very tough situations, challenging situations. What do you think about it?
One of the areas that Levinas often turns to is the ways in which religious groups have faced these kinds of issues. And religious groups face them through a particular form of reading and as a methodology. And the reading is not the reading that Plato offers, but a reading that we could call prophetic reading, which I talked about up until now as contextual reading. I have a definition of the prophetic that I like to use, and maybe this would be helpful here. The prophetic, I say when I teach, for example, Sophocles or Euripides, prophetic is the recognition, I'll say it, and then I'll go back piece by piece. There's 5 or 6 parts of it. Prophetic is a recognition of the dramas in which human beings are engaged, and naming in advance of the end of those dramas in order that we can choose to go there. Prophetic is the recognition of the dramas in which human beings are engaged, and the naming in advance of the end of those dramas in order that we can choose to go to those ends or not. In other words, it's a recognition that what confronts us is not simply a thing in itself, but a drama. And that human beings are, just the most simple kinds of dramas are born and they pass away. And human beings in our culture get married and often they have kids. That's a drama. There are stages before, during, and after and that take place. And the prophetic is a recognition of these things that go on, these dramas, that what we're looking at, what we're thinking of as a text is not really a text, but a kind of slice. When you look at, when you consider some of the individuals who look at very, very small quantum mechanics kinds of things, they talk about a text as a slice of all these things that are happening and taking place. So a text is not something that we compose as a thing in itself, but is simply an interruption of a series of dramas of shooting atoms or bosons or whatever they call them, these little tiny particles that show up in a fraction of a second and disappear in a fraction of a second. Yet we can see them and we make readings on the basis of this. The prophetic is a recognition that we are always in the middle of dramas that are ongoing, and that we have to recognize those dramas, recognize the structure of those dramas, because they all have structures, and the structures are never the same ones. Everyone has a different structure, and they always have a future and they always have a past, and we can choose to follow that future or not follow that future. This is one of the ways in which religious thinking has engaged with these missions impossible that you point out. It seems to me that the culture always has faced this. That, Levi-Strauss talks about this. Claude Levi-Strauss talks about this all the time. How cultures deal with certain things. Cultures can make mistakes. I mean, Levi-Strauss always talks about how there are cultures that were built inside of volcanoes because they just didn't know that the sounds that they heard were not the God, but was the volcano rumbling. And then one day it rumbles, and you can't do anything about it because that's where you are. So cultures can make mistakes, but cultures have a certain way in a Levi-Straussian manner of structuring those mistakes. Well, religious thinking to some extent often has that differs to some extent from the model that we're used to thinking, which is really the model of representation, model based on the notion of truth and something that's there it's the there-ness in front of us. It's the presence that someone like Jacques Derrida, this guy that I mentioned, is always challenging. And he's saying, there's nothing really present there. He's a Heideggerian. Derrida's a kind of Heideggerian. So there's really nothing there, but there is a drama that's taking place. I tried to emphasize in my course that the drama could be looked at, and I used a word that comes from a cultural anthropologist with whom I wrote my dissertation, was René Girard, as a sacrificial structure. That Girard's idea is that all of culture is based upon a sacrificial structure, which is actually founded on murder, which is actually founded on lynching. That at the origin of culture, we are the culture that lynched one of our own in order to survive, and then the cultures that lynched one of their own survived up until the modern age, which is when Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and Judaism and Christianity said this is not working anymore, and the sacrificial mechanism, which is the phrase, the scapegoat mechanism, is the phrase that Girard is failing and is turning upon ourselves, and any attempt to do the sacrificial mechanism only results in more need for the sacrificial mechanism. It doesn't bring an end to the sacrifice. So the theater of Dionysus, which we talked about in this course, which was based upon the sacrificial structure, was a failing structure for these writers. Tragedy is the recognition of the failure of sacrifice. And Christianity would sometimes define itself as the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. Judaism defines itself as a law of anti-idolatry. Idolatry understood as a kind of obsession with certain behaviors that in other contexts would have served well, and to do certain things positively that now only compound those difficulties when we try to do them. Idolatry as a kind of obsessive behavior. And Buddhism has its own versions of these in Islam and Hinduism as well. So that religious thinking would turn to what is sometimes called the prophetic or prophetic reading as one possible alternative. And so the question would be, to what extent could a doctor become, to answer your question directly, a prophetic reader of the individual that's facing him, and whose face she may or may not have access to? To what extent? Yeah.
I'm sorry, do you mean like reading the situation? Or just reading the text as some kind of narrative?
Everything about it. Reading a text, if there is one, reading what the patient, listening to, he talks about listening to the patient, hearing everything that's going on, and as a drama in which there is a future, a past, and strategies, in which there is an origin, strategies, and a future. Because you'll find them in places that you didn't even expect them to be. Sometimes they're called symptoms. In psychoanalysis, they're called symptoms. Freud would talk about patients. Is this a symptom or simply something accidentally showing up? By which Freud means, is it part of a drama? Is it part of something that's ongoing and should work out this way, or should work? Look like you have a question. Yeah.
Yes. I think, do I understand correctly, this situation, as you had sort of prophetic reading, in this, conflict situation, as you described this, Eimantas, as far as I see it, the doctor, anyone in that situation, a professional, healthcare professional, should feel like detached from the situation. Like you, for example, as far as I understood from this concept, like, okay, I can imagine those situations can happen. I know how to handle them, and not to get actually involved a lot in that situation.
That can be a potential strategy. It seems to me there's no one way to do it. It depends on the situation in which you're involved. Perhaps detachment is the way to respond to a patient who is requiring you to become part of her or his drama. And you know, so detachment would allow you to stand back and say, okay, I understand that you want this, but will this serve you?
Theater.
Like a theater. Let's look at the show. I mean,
remember that
Freud-
it is. If you forget, so that it becomes real drama.
Freud talked about transference.
Yeah. The way I imagine prophetic reading during consultation.
Yeah.
For example, there comes a patient who is like standard patient, you know, with patient with similar symptoms, similar life circumstances, and other things. And okay, I can look at that and say, okay, one more, another one. Yeah, the 20th for today. Yeah, with the same tricks, with the same. And sometimes, you know, I've heard one notice from one nurse who said, "I feel poisoned by humans, you know, or poisoned of humans." Means I'm talking so much. There are so many similar patients that I got fed up with that. Yeah. And reading prophetically would mean that, okay, you know, there is a patient with similar symptoms, with similar problems, similar familial issues. Family members are giving similar questions and so on, but I am now looking for the future, not just looking, you know, that again, not one more, yeah, but maybe thinking about, okay, now I know how usually we are dealing with the situation, but also how can we deal with it in this case? Do you understand?
Yeah.
What can we do? You know, we already know what was done. We know what's working and what's not, and so on. But now, individually, in each case, we are taking each case as a new.
Each case is different. Yeah.
Even if we are reading the same text for the 20th time. You know,
so that's why there's no one way to approach it. There's only ways of reading, I would say.
And probably now what we are talking about, you know, it reminds me hermeneutics. Hermeneutic approach.
Hermeneutics, yeah.
And in hermeneutics, usually we deal when we are reading text, we're reading one part of text and get an idea about the whole of the text. And after that, you know, when you're reading the second part of the text, then, you know, our general understanding of the text is changing. And even if we are reading the same text for the second time, we are reading it differently. And this way we are increasing our understanding of the text.
Stanley Fish used to say there's always a truth, but it's never the same one.
And here again, you know, when you're dealing with patients, each new patient is changing my understanding, you know, what is the problem, what is the understanding of illness probably, and also understanding of my role, you know, how I'm managing the situation.
Yeah.
Because we have you here as Levinas expert, and sometimes interpreting Levinas ideas, it might be challenging even for us, for Lithuanians, even though that Levinas was born here and so on. But for example, can I ask you just to clarify a little bit, because if I understand correctly, Levinas ethics, Levinas says that each of us, I mean, in meeting other persons, whatever we do in our professional life, personal life, and so on, it doesn't matter. We should take the commitment or like this full responsibility, especially when we meet, when we establish this authentic relationship. Yeah,
there's no shoulds in Levinas. There's no shoulds.
It is, yeah. It is.
It is. It's not a prescription, it's a description.
Okay, yeah. So I mean that in terms of doctor-patient or just health professional and patient relationship, then it means that it's not only about health professional commitments,
That's right.
but also about patients. So it should be a kind of mutual. And if I understand correctly, in Levinas ethics, like you said, it is that everybody is performing in this way, establishing this kind of relationship, and then it's something what we call humanity.
Something what we call humanity.
Humanity is that when we have this kind of interrelationship.
Yes.
But what I'm trying to say that maybe then we can say that it's not only about health professionals, but also about patients.
Yes.
So maybe we educate, we should engage patients, to
read Levinas.
no, not with Levinas, probably not to everybody, but to see the relationship when they come, for example, to medical doctor. It's not only about that doctor's duties, because I'm talking that, for example, in patient-centered approach, we say that we should have a kind of mutual relationship, not necessarily maybe equal relationship, but also sharing responsibility. That maybe also patients, they also could, take some kind of commitments, and they should have also responsibilities. Some kind of responsibilities, the question is what kind of responsibility, but it's not only about one part of being responsible for everything, but all of us are responsible. Is there any relevance to?
I think it's absolutely relevant. I think I would even go farther and suggest that one might think about the possibility of requiring an engagement on the part of the patient in their own health discussions, this has a name in psychoanalysis. It's called transference. Transference is when you bring into your doctor-patient relationship the very symptoms that brought you to the doctor-patient relationship, and you reproduce them in that context in a guided way so that the patient can take stock of that drama that is going on. That it's not that we remove ourselves from being simply servicing or machines, which, as you say, machines can probably do it better, be better digital nurses. But can machines engage in transference? Can machines guide a transference? Would be my question, because it might be that that transferential relationship is what is not only allowed, but might even be required in this context.
But no, that's okay. In ideal situation, we have responsible.
You don't like that idea at all.
And we have responsible patient. If both of them are responsible, both of them put the other, in front, like take care of the other, patient cares of the doctor cares of the patient, then that's great. But now when we talk about patients, I don't know, for example, the patient is suffering, and the patient, for example, hasn't read Levinas, it's the book, and now, for example, he doesn't care about anything. He cares about himself or herself, and that's it. And the patient is shouting, and the patient is maybe threatening the doctor, and now he's not responsible. He's not responsible, let's say, to maintain ethical.
As far from responsibility as possible.
Irresponsible as possible. And now the question is, can a doctor be responsible as well?
I think a doctor has to be, in particular, in that situation. The question, another version of it is, am I responsible for Hitler? Is someone who's Jewish responsible for Hitler? I would say yes. How you exercise that responsibility may be different in one case than ways in which you exercise responsibility in another case. If someone, Vidas, is coming to you the door and wants to kill your children, and the only way that you can stop them is by killing them, it may be that the only way you can be responsible to both your children and to that person is to kill them. So this doesn't prescribe that responsibility means you can't do this or you can't do that. There's no moral code attached to how you do responsibility. It's just that you do the responsible thing, that you do what's concerning, and how you learn it. And these are all questions that, maybe the prophetic or a kind of reading method that's different from representation but I mean, that you have to be responsible, seems to me, is what I would take to be Levinas's point, not how. I don't think Levinas knows, he's never shied away from saying this may be the most difficult thing we have to face in our lives. He's not saying this is easy or that it's good necessarily. But it may be that this is who we are and the only way, in fact, we can act. It's not for survival. It may not even issue in survival, but it may be that this is how we turn out to be able to function ourselves. I mean, what we're really asking is, what is the function of responsibility? Why be responsible? Is it a function because we're good? I don't think Levinas would say that.
Actually, I want to ask for your reflection on this case, because we touched the question of whether ethical is good, which leads a bit to a question of what's the added value of being responsible.
Yeah, the value, exactly.
And so if we are going with health practitioner who passes Turing test with just formal phrases and patient believes, so what's the added value of being responsible, performing eventually?
Yeah.
But if we go 3 pages of my conspect back, there was one thing, phrase loving the other is yourself.
Absolutely.
Loving the other,
loving the other as yourself.
Is yourself.
Is yourself.
Yeah.
Is yourself.
So eventually, maybe why we need ethics is for ourselves, because if we just go with the approach of passing formal Turing test, eventually we are slowly losing ourselves. And if you if major part of your life is built of just formal steps from 8 to 7, kind of feel bad for you. So maybe that's part of the answer why ethical could be good. It's good not only from health practitioner to the patient, it's from health practitioner to himself as a human being also, probably something like that. Just thoughts.
So it's useful to be ethical, is useful for yourself. It's good for yourself, at least. Yeah, but when we talk about responsibility and full responsibility, probably, let's say, even if we deal with irresponsible other, that means that taking, for example, preventive measures against this person is already responsibility for the responsibility of the other.
Yeah.
And especially if you can prevent, let's say, fatal consequences, that means that we are responsible for the other's death, life or death as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So that means being responsible does not mean just fulfilling wishes of someone or being a servant to someone.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe this, it's maybe I'm simplifying, but I am thinking that's, we are educated, for certain positions, to be health professional. So for me, this, prophetic reading, it's the knowledge I have. I am educated to be a physician. I'm educated to be a nurse. So it means that I have that, wisdom, I have knowledge, I have skills to recognize and to act in certain situations according to the knowledge, experience, and everything I have. So maybe this is, also part of this, how to say, developed responsibility through formal education. What we do. Of course, in ideal situation, we would like to have these knowledgeable patients as well. And in our healthcare system, we know this health literacy, that they are knowledgeable about their health, how to behave, how to act. But again, many different situations, many different dramas can happen, and there are no like single answer. But Eimantas is raising the question, about these difficult situations. It's not easy.
Yeah, and probably education is like, as you, Professor, say, that like culture already, has some, I would say stories or explanations, and that means, again, when we deal with medical knowledge that is gathered, how to deal with patients, how to deal with symptoms and other things, it's already, written, and we already have some knowledge. Now, of course, we need to read that not backwards, but forward.
And also education, I think we talked the other day that within the education, it's very important to have this, humanistic subjects, philosophy, ethics, and to be embedded into our clinical training. And I think that's how to say, harmonize our knowledge, education, and make us resilient.
Yeah, totally agree. And also in introducing or adding medical humanities. That means also reading literature. For example, now we, for medical students, ask them to read a story, where a physician himself got sick or something like that, and they feel touched. Students feel touched because you can now, and probably they are reading prophetically, because now here, you're reading and you are just a doctor in training. And if you're a doctor in training, you are now already reading, differently as compared to just, let's say, other person. And inclusion of medical humanities is very useful. That allows us to think and imagine, and sometimes even to enact situations where we wouldn't like to get in, because literature helps us also think about situations, some weirdest situations, which we should try to avoid in reality, similarly as the dramas professor was talking about. Okay, probably just some summarization. Can everyone share some ideas, thoughts, what you learned from this discussion? And
let me start.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm going to forget later. Imagine now.
Now we will record.
Will you? So, well, I was listening to everybody today, and this idea now fixed again in my mind, so I have to get rid of it. I'm imagining myself now as a Christian in some, really from that religious perspective. A Christian in some lands and going there to teach them the real Christianity, and show them the way, and force them to read Bible and all the holy books we have. Shall I bring Levinas to them as well, or just a Bible? So as a good Christian, I would say, again, returning back, in vain, they did not believe me. And I'm listening to you, reading articles, listening to Levinas interpreters, and I say, well, it is all in vain as well. Why? You're speaking about responsibility, otherness, and hospitality, and so on. But it's ancient story, Forget it all. All you need is love. Love your patients. How did it happen? You forgot it all. Love yourself, love your patients, and love your enemy as you love yourself. Anything else? All the rest is in vain.
Levinas says love is responsibility.
So, okay, that's what they said.
Yeah.
Shall I bring Levinas as well, or Bible is enough?
Okay, so let's replace responsibility for love.
Does it sound better? Maybe much simpler because I feel a responsibility for my students now.
But isn't that within the responsibility to love the other?
Jesus is asked in Matthew 22, what's the key? Give us the key. And he says, he quotes Deuteronomy, actually Deuteronomy 6. He said, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy might. And the guy says, well, what else? That's not enough. What else? The guy says, and Jesus responds, said, to love the other as yourself, as or is yourself. What are you talking? So we go back to Deuteronomy. What does it mean to love the Lord thy God? This is a, kind of important notion in Deuteronomy. It's maybe the central prayer of Judaism, that Jesus, who is Jewish and Orthodox Jewish, and thinking back to his own origins and saying what's the key here. The key is in Deuteronomy 6, at least, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy might, with all thy soul. Maybe that's how responsibility changes the notion of love. That love is not just a feeling, but with every cell in my body.
Yeah, if I may say, just taking a chance, first of all, we appreciated very much meetings with you. And for example, what I learned personally, I don't know what about others, but, we are living in the society or culture, which I would call, please give us ready for use products,
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have the same in medicine and maybe even in education, when nobody wants to go deeper, read, nobody wants to prophetic reading because it requires some kind of efforts and so on. But on the other hand, nobody is gonna give you a kind of deep understanding of consciousness, what is also very important here for these kind of discussions and so on. So I think if we just give advices to our students, to our colleagues, health professionals, or whatever, it's not as much efficient as we invite them maybe to look at original. Yeah, it's like in museum. If you see original picture and if you see copy, they might look very, 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 very close to each other, very, very like the same. But on the other hand, there is some kind of difference. Yeah.
Yes.
So reading original text and especially philosophical text, I think can be valuable for everybody, even in nowadays. So it's just my belief. Maybe I'm too much optimistic. I don't know.
Too much sensitive.
Yeah, when students usually say, why do I need to read this? I have to read 300 pages of cardiology. And so now it's like waste of time. No. But what came to my mind while listening to Eimantas, it's a really good insight. What probably AI will not be able to do is reading prophetically.
Reading prophetic. Yes, there you go.
And why I'm telling this, because when we ask some of students to read a story and then to reflect on that, sometimes they use AI to generate, the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so visible, you can't conceal that,
Right,
that they haven't read the text prophetically, they haven't read the text at all.
Right.
And so probably this is within the human.
I don't know what I brought from this meeting except of some really good quotes. I definitely like the quote of like responsibility is an inescapable call, which allows, like, it's not a free choice, it's inescapable call. So which allows to review some of the choices and decisions done before, like where I felt this call and where I did it because I felt it, where I just eventually took another choice, which means I was not responsible, but eventually we are used to go on with self-excuses on why we did this or did not. So eventually it like this soul probably absolutization of the term of responsibility just draws like more strict line in our own choices and like self-reflections of our deeds.
Okay, I was thinking a lot during this discussion that I enjoyed. Thank you very much for the lecture. And I was thinking about, what to learn from this and tell in short. I think I would like, I start why I enjoyed being here, because somehow that's why I probably understand that it would be useful for everyone to feel like me. Because it's very good to go from your everyday context. I don't know how it would be. Would that be possible for healthcare professionals? I was thinking to have so many rests that people could be able even to go for themselves, just to enjoy philosophy and not like forced, not like very tired from the jobs, like, just thinking about what happened just 1 hour ago. And calmly to have a time to contemplate about, like today, even rethinking the concepts, the meaning of the words we usually use in every day, and we do not think about the meanings of them. And we do not find it practical, as well as probably the students, when we saw they're thinking why to read those texts, because we still have practical things like anatomy and other things, which are really very important for them to study. Why to read this? Because it's so seems for pleasure, like music, like to go to a classical concert. But it's really, I felt here very useful, because it created this space you talk about, this more deeper space for us to understand more about our world, about patients' worlds, about my own, and to build the identity, probably to broaden our limits and still also to stabilize them. So that could be my short reflection. Short. Thank you very much. Yes, I.
Well, for me, this, time was kind of, connecting and strengthening, what is extremely important in daily life. And I very often repeat to myself and to others that it's very important in real life to be non-indifferent. And today I've got also citation. I was taking the notes that responsibility is being non-indifferent.
Yeah.
So this non-indifferent also for me, it's very close, with the word love. And actually love is also responsibility for others. So in a way, for me, this is, very beautiful connection of this non-indifference, responsibility, and love.
And Professor, final word.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree with you completely. It's responsibility and love, non-indifference, disinterestedness. This is, I was thinking this morning, what is if we're asking for responsibility, what is it? It's capacity to respond. It's the response ability. We have the ability to respond, and we can respond, and that it is human to respond, and that is love. It's that capacity. Whatever else it is, and however we have to get at it or get it, what it is our capacity to be human, to respond, and respond in the name we give to it is love.
And so, Professor, your final impression of the whole series, did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's very different for me. I mean, I actually never before have taught Levinas in terms of literature. I've only taught Levinas in terms of Heidegger and Husserl and Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and Plato and Aristotle. And I've taught literature in terms of other, literary writers. So to put them together, allowed me to understand how valuable, to come back to this idea of what prophetic thinking is, because that is real. We're all really struggling to find a way in to prophetic thinking, because prophetic thinking may be what we are. Maybe that our body is embodiment of prophetic thinking. Maybe it is prophetic thinking come to life, so to speak, or frozen prophetic thinking or something. Maybe we are instances of prophetic thinking that we have to try to tap into. Maybe that's what our cells are doing. Maybe that's what growth is. Maybe that's what the logic of the biology is, and therefore an ethics of the logic of the bio would be prophetic thinking. Thinking, yeah, I don't know.
And probably if to follow Rosenzweig, it's like revelation.
It's like revelation. We don't know where it's going. We're hoping, we have hopes and desires and fears, but what we know is that it's revelation. It's the infinite within the finite. It's an instance of the infinite within the finite, which we can think of as our past, and revelation is the revelation of this infinite within the finite, which is moving towards maybe a redemption of the future that we don't have, we hope for, but we don't have access to. But we're always within. I mean, even when Christianity wanted to imagine that the Messiah had come, they had to say, well, but there's a second coming. It's just a taste. It's not the final moment. And I always love to tell the story that Martin Buber tells with his Christian friends. Says that you, my Christian friends, say the Messiah has come, but he is coming again. We say the Messiah has not yet come, but he is coming, or she is coming. Mashiach is coming. If that's the only thing that stops us from getting together, so whether he's come or not, why don't we work together? And when the Messiah gets here, we'll ask if he was here before.
No more wars. Okay, so nothing's coming in this series. So this is the last event. So thank you for joining. Thank you to the professor. Thanks everyone. And let's wait for new events. So have a nice evening and bye-bye.